So now that we have spent some time talking about genetic factors related to development and environmental factors related to development, we're going to look at some different things that can happen if things don't go the way they're expected to go. And so the outcome of that can be that the child would have a birth defect. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about birth defects, and then we're going to do a project. So, a few things that you should know about birth defects. The first is that a birth defect is basically a structural, functional, or metabolic abnormality that's present at the time of birth, and it may cause physical or mental disabilities in the child. So, one of the things that's important to note is that the abnormality may be present at birth, but not expressed at birth. So with some birth defects, they may not really show up necessarily until some time has passed, but they're there. And it's not really that you see them until the child is not doing things that he or she is expected to do or that they would normally do. So birth defects don't always show themselves immediately, even though they are there. So in terms of prevalence, about 1 of every 33 babies has a birth defect, and 1 of every 100 to 200 babies has a heart defect. 1 of every 1,000 babies has a brain or spinal defect. And in general, birth defects are the leading cause of death of babies under 1 year of age. So what causes birth defects? There are 3 key elements that contribute to whether or not a child will have a birth defect. So the first is a genetic problem, and we looked a little bit at problems associated with genetics and inheritance. Another is a chromosome abnormality, and that could be problems with chromosomes transferring from the parent to the child during the fertilization of the egg. And the last is environmental factors, which we discussed, such as the teratogens. So we're going to be looking at the different kinds of birth defects and which ones are caused by which particular factors. Alright, so to further explain the different types of birth defects, a structural birth defect is related to a problem with the formation of a body part. So in particular, a body part like a limb could be missing, or it could be improperly formed. So it's really more of the noticeable physical features of the child. A functional or developmental birth defect is related more to how a body part or system works. So types of functional and developmental birth defects could be things like nervous system or brain problems, sensory problems associated with hearing or vision, and things like that. The last kind is a metabolic birth defect, and basically that is just related to problems with the body's chemistry. So a metabolic defect is not outwardly noticeable, but it usually involves some sort of process or chemical pathway, such as the removal of waste. So primarily this kind of birth defect affects the metabolism and the body's ability to turn food into waste. Now, all of these different kinds of birth defects can be what is known as a degenerative disorder, and basically all this means is that the function of the affected area will decrease over time. So no matter what the influence or the cause or the type, the birth defect could be degenerative, so it could be something that gets progressively worse. So that's just a little bit of background on birth defects, and what we're going to do in class is we are going to be doing some research into different kinds of birth defects, so I'm going to show you what that project will involve. So what you'll do is you'll be working with either a partner, or if you would like to work alone, you can work alone. And you're going to research a specific birth defect to find out some different kind of information about it. And it's important to note that birth defects have a lasting impact on children, and they can impact their ability to learn and function in school. And so that's why it's important that we study those in this course. So to present your birth defect, you can choose to create a brochure, a poster, or a trifold, or you can do a PowerPoint or a Prezi. If you are interested in doing some other form of presentation, something with multimedia, or maybe like a Powtoon or something like that, I'm open to that. Just let me know. Your presentation must include and discuss the following elements. So you need to define the birth defect, including what type it is. So is it a structural birth defect? Is it a functional birth defect? Is it a metabolic disorder? Is it degenerative? You also need to discuss the causes. So is it primarily something that's a result of genetic factors or a chromosomal abnormality, or does it have to do with exposure to some sort of environmental factor? You have to also talk about the symptoms and the effects on the child's development. So is it a physical or a cognitive defect, and in what ways is the child impacted? Are there any treatments? And then you should also include any kinds of images, graphs, or charts that will help to illustrate the defect and how it works. Everything that you use, all of your resources, must include a works cited page in APA format. So see me if you need help with that. As a reminder, be sure to put information in your own words so your classmates can understand it. In terms of grading, for feedback, you're going to turn in a blue note sheet, complete with both explicit and implicit information. So the explicit information is going to be the details about your topic from the text or whatever other resource you use. Implicit information is going to be conclusions you can draw about your topic and how it will impact the child's performance in school. And then for the formative grade, you will submit the copy of your presentation or project. If it's a file, you will upload it to the wiki. So you will have 3 days in class to work on doing the research and completing the actual presentation or display itself, and then we'll spend 1 to 2 days presenting. You have different topics to choose from, and we'll assign those topics tomorrow. There are also several different resources that you can use, including these textbooks and websites. I'll post these on the wiki so that you can get to them easily. In terms of grading, the project will be worth 81 points. So I'll be looking at the professional appearance of your project as well as the content coverage. So do you cover all of the information in detail, the content explanation as far as breaking down the complex terms so that an ordinary person can understand, and then your bibliography. So please make sure that you follow the guidelines for the rubric. And then here is an example project on a disorder called Tay-Sachs disease. So this is a brochure that I just converted into Word for this purpose. So basically you have your title page there. This is what the disease looks like inside the cells. So basically Tay-Sachs is a degenerative disorder in which your nerve cells can't break down fat because they're missing an enzyme that does that. So the fatty substances take over the cell and kill them, and usually this occurs most often in brain cells. So obviously if the brain cell is being impacted and they're not surviving, then that affects the child's ability to do pretty much everything. So I put in cultural prevalence. You don't have to do this, but this disease is common to Jewish families of Eastern European and Russian descent. It's pretty rare. One out of every 300,000 babies born in the general population has this, but it is a pretty serious disease. So basically, the cause is it's a defective gene, and the gene does not signal the production of an enzyme, and that enzyme is called hexaminidase A. And basically that enzyme will break down the waste products that form in cells. And so because that enzyme isn't there, the cell can't break down and dispose of waste, and it becomes overwhelmed by the waste that's included and it dies off. So it's passed down genetically through a recessive gene. So we talked about recessive versus dominant inheritance, and so you can look at this chart and see that just because you have to have a carrier parent, both parents have to be carriers in order for the child to inherit the disorder. So some general symptoms, basically, they start showing up around the age of around 6 months of age, and so they include blindness, deafness, difficulty swallowing, decreased muscle tone. So for instance, in this visual, if you hold the child, they're not able to hold up their neck or lift up their head. So they have a loss of muscle tone because their cells are breaking down. They also have an increased startle reflex, commonly have seizures, and ultimately may end up having paralysis. So basically, in terms of testing and treatment, what they'll do is they'll test to see if the child has the enzyme that's necessary, and so they'll do a blood test for that. You can also do a test on amniotic fluid or blood taken from the umbilical cord, and this usually happens right after the birth. So if the child has half the normal amount of the hexaminidase, then they are a carrier. So they did inherit the recessive gene, but they also inherited a dominant gene, so that they're just a carrier. But if there's none of that enzyme, then they have the disease. So basically, if there currently is no treatment for this disease, and it is fatal, so the child usually dies by the age of 4. So that's that particular type of birth defect. So the thing to note there again is a degenerative disorder caused by, it's a metabolic disorder because the cell can't break down fat and waste to discard it. And it's caused by genetics, so it's a genetic factor, it's inherited disease. So these are the kinds of things that you're going to be looking for your project. You want to look for good visuals that will illustrate causes or symptoms or inheritance or other factors that show causes. This particular one is a visual of the cells, so you can see that the cells are becoming enlarged over time, almost to bursting, because they can't break down the waste that's inside. And then of course you have the works cited here on the back. So this is the kind of thing that you will be creating. So in class tomorrow we will assign the topics, and I'll answer any questions that you have.